Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Last Letter, A Father's Struggle, A Daughter's Quest, and the Long Shadow of the Holocaust, by Baum Gordon, narrated by Christa Lewis. Drawing from the past, living in the present, shaping the future. Rabbi Abraham Geiger, my great-great-great-uncle. Forward. What are the enduring legacies of war? At the outset of this series, I intended scholars to explore the myriad effects war had on society, from economic and geographical impacts to personal accounts of tragedy and loss. And while countless books have been published on World War II, the Holocaust, and the enduring tragedies born of that conflict and genocide, scholars, researchers, and students are still examining what is commonly referred to as the long shadow of the Holocaust, or the long-suffering generational effects that ripple through the families of veterans and Jews alike. The serious study of the Holocaust's lasting consequences has produced fascinating questions as to whether severe trauma born from war and genocide can be passed down to subsequent generations. Though medical studies are not definitive toward this end, in terms of the cultural impact on family units, there is no question that generational trauma is a very real issue, and that Holocaust victims and their extended families live with continual reminders of the worst genocide the world has ever seen. Baum Gordon's beautiful exploration of her own family's search for answers amid a personal tragedy presents this near-universal testament among Jewish survivors in stark and honest detail. In the last letter, Baum Gordon recounts the impact of the Holocaust and World War II on 4 generations of her family. She seeks to understand the lives and deaths of her paternal grandparents, Norbert and Rudy Baum, German Jews who went from a comfortable life in Frankfurt, Germany, to exile and death in a Polish ghetto. She remembers her own experiences growing up with her father, Rudy Baum, who managed to escape Germany and appeared over the years to have successfully embraced his American identity. But deep down, her father could not escape the trauma he endured from his inability to save his parents from the clutches of the Nazis. At 86 years old, Rudy Baum attempted suicide. This would not only shock his daughter, but also sparked her quest to understand his reasons. This led her to reconstruct her grandparents' and father's stories through family letters and related archival sources, numerous trips and interviews, and existing scholarship on the Holocaust. This is a story of how individuals grapple with their identity. Baum Gordon recounts the assimilation of her grandparents into German society in the opening decades of the 20th century. While the Baums remained observant Jews, they rejected Zionism, and they viewed themselves as German first. Like many other German Jews, her grandfather had fought bravely in the German army during World War I. Within a few short years of the Nazis' seizure of power, her grandparents faced betrayal as the Germany they had loved deprived them of their freedom of movement, property, and citizenship. Although the majority of German Jews managed to leave Germany by 1941, her grandparents would be unable to escape and were deported to a Polish ghetto. Rudy Baum would be fortunate to leave Germany before the door slammed shut. Not only did Rudy embrace his new country and its customs, but he also joined the ranks of the U.S. Army during the war, and ultimately took part in the liberation of the concentration camp Buchenwald. After the war ended, Rudy served in the occupation government of the American Zone in Germany and played an important role in re-establishing one historical German town's free press. The last letter offers insights into one channel supporting Germany to make the transition from fascism to a stable democratic nation. Equal parts biography, personal memoir, and anthology of family correspondence, Baum Gordon eschews simple analysis and is brutally honest. She offers a compelling portrait of a good son, husband, father, and citizen who struggled with demons that haunted him for decades. She is honest about what she views her father grappled with, about what she grapples with, and about what she sees in her son's emerging identities. As this work will underscore, the legacies of war can endure for decades after the fighting stopped. G. Kurt Peeler, Florida State University. Preface. The letter was written on onion skin paper in Zutalin, an ornate, early 20th century form of German handwriting, nearly 8 decades ago. It was written by my grandmother, a woman I never knew. The yellowed paper was brittle and ready to crumble to the touch. It must remain intact, I thought, as it is, as it has been for these many years. A corner can't tear, a word can't be lost. It is just one letter in a stack of many, and I begin to wonder about the journey of my grandparents' lives, some of it surely revealed in these letters. This is a story of 3 journeys, the first being that of my grandparents, Julie and Norbert Baum, who lived in Frankfurt, Germany under Adolf Hitler. They believed that the worst would not come to pass. They believed this until it was too late. The second journey was that of my father, Rudy, Julie and Norbert's son, who escaped the Nazis for America and built a life here, but who was unable to save his parents. He would return to Germany after the war to help liberate Buchenwald, but despite Rudy's achievements as a soldier, he paid a great personal price for that failure. The third journey is my own, as I worked to understand my father's late-in-life attempt to kill himself, and that event's connection to his parents and their fate, and to come to terms with my own German-Jewish heritage. This book is informed by, and in fact quotes at length, 88 letters written by my grandparents, primarily my grandmother, to their son, my father, between November 1936 and October 1941. Letters to America full of everything from gossip and laundry instructions to portents of the unspeakable. It also draws upon my father's writing and speeches about his experience, including his autobiography, on documentary research, on multiple interviews, on the work of great historians like Saul Friedlander and Marion Kaplan. I discovered numerous documents through the hours of research on the internet in the quiet of my own office. Tracking down documents and people through sources such as Ancestry.com, the Red Cross International Tracing Service, and the websites of various Holocaust museums. After I learned that the older Frankfurt archives are housed in the Hessian State Archives in Hesse's capital, Wiesbaden, I requested the complete document files of my grandparents. Those files, for the years 1935 to 1961, had more than 200 pages, almost all tax-related, many with official stamps and signatures. Included were tax returns, records of furniture sales, financial office notes of suspicion about my grandfather, employment verification for my father, restitution papers. Reading through the pages chronologically, I felt the gradually increasing scrutiny and restrictions tightening the financial noose that slowly limited my grandparents' lives. Lives with virtually no choice. Small living quarters, almost no money and no assets, no work, little food. Meanwhile, I have expandable file folders bursting with documents and artifacts from my father's life. These treasure troves of history offered me tangible connections to what would otherwise have been a reading about or description of. I can hold in my hand the very bits of history that my father touched, that he chose to save for these, oh, so many years. a tiny newspaper clipping from 1941 recounting my father's naturalization proceeding, a postcard with a picture of the ship my father took when he left Germany, leaving his parents behind, with the ship's scheduled to the minute itinerary of its port arrivals and departures. Picture albums with photos of everyday lives in normal times, just before and after the turn to the 20th century, and then albums full of photos during World War II. I also directly traced and retraced elements of my father's and grandparents' past on several trips to Frankfurt and one to Łódź, Poland, where my grandparents died in the ghetto. In Frankfurt, I met with an archivist of the Jewish Museum. In his large office with floor-to-ceiling piles of historical materials and barely a place to sit, together we pored over telephone books from the 1930s in search of addresses and occupations. He clicked through his familiar databases in focused search of answers to one or another of my several questions. I spent time with a historian at the Institut für Stadtgeschichte Frankfurt am Main, the Institute for Frankfurt City Archives. We solved the mystery of the location of my grandfather's office, as its street address no longer existed. We thumbed through scores of 2-by-3-foot maps piled upright to find those that could tell us the story of the street changes over time. Then, with a few short taps on his computer, the historian sent me on my way with a CD that held the answer to my question, fitting neatly in my small bag. I had the privilege to work with and befriend the late Monica King Green, a researcher at the Fritz Bauer Institute, who was one of the foremost experts on the deportations in the 1940s from Germany. Her research provided detailed accounts of the deportations, the kind my grandparents endured, beginning with the moment people were forcibly pulled from their homes. I walked through cemeteries in Frankfurt and Łódź with cemetery administrators who for decades have taken care not only of the grave sites but also of people like me in search of loved ones' burial sites and tombstones. The administrators were deeply knowledgeable about Jewish burial and grieving customs, though they were not Jewish themselves. They were full of stories about the lives of the people whose tombstones they guard. The weaving together of the threads of my search resulted in this big history as seen through ordinary lives. As I recreated the journeys of my grandparents and my father and confronted my own, William Faulkner's words about history became a guiding truth. The past is never dead. It's not even past. Part 1. A Tortured Soul. May God forgive me. Rudy Baum. 1. Dallas, 2002. My father tried to kill himself when he was 86 years old. My mother, his wife of 58 years, was still alive and needed him. He enjoyed spending time with his 3 children and their families, including his 6 grandsons. The small tent calendar on his desk had, until not long before his suicide attempt, something scribbled in it for almost every day. Lunches, dinners, panel discussions, cultural events. He had seemed so full of life. He was rather slight, at 5'7" and a steady weight of 127 pounds. He kept in shape by walking vigorously 2 miles most days. He had a full head of silvery gray hair with a touch of waviness, hinting of once even wavier hair. He was usually dressed sharply in slacks coordinated with a collared shirt, often relatively new purchases. But in his later years he somehow wore his belt closer to his armpits than his waist. My friends, who found my father to be charismatic, would have to book a month in advance to have lunch with him. He was a good conversationalist and usually had an informed point of view about all sorts of topics, such as Dallas mayoral candidates or Texas gubernatorial candidates, the Dallas Cowboys, the stock market's ups and downs, retailers that were expanding, companies filing for bankruptcy, the dot-com bubble, world leaders, global summits. I had a strong relationship with him. I always felt his unconditional love and support. As a little girl, I ran down the driveway on Friday afternoons to greet my father, a traveling salesman, when I heard his big Buick pulling up as he returned from his 5-day road trip. I was eager to download in one breath all of the seemingly major events of the week: how I did on my most recent math test, why Mom yelled at me, how my sister's friend was mean to me. And then I couldn't wait to see if he had brought home any delicious treats, such as kolaches, the Czech-filled pastries from the tiny town of West Texas, or sausages from New Braunfels, a town with German heritage in the heart of Texas Hill Country. My father appreciated a wide range of foods, from authentic grub found in hole-in-the-wall spots to fine French cuisine offered in fancy restaurants. No surprise, I grew to have a love of food. I even trained as a chef and managed several restaurants. My father and I were similar, both extroverts, both people connectors, both early birds energized by jam-packed days, both interested in family history, in the past. I never thought my father would ever do something that would hurt those he loved, including me. Still, he tried to kill himself. On February 11th, 2002, a Monday, I was in my kitchen in Brooklyn making dinner when the phone rang. I recognized the 214 area code, Dallas, but not the number. My husband, Bob, answered upstairs. After a few minutes, he called to me. "Can you come up here for a minute? It's Don Cole." Don and Judy Cole were my parents' neighbors. The previous months, December and January, had been particularly trying for my parents. My mother's congestive heart failure and lymphoma had left her ever more compromised, though she could still drive to the grocery store and to her water aerobics class. So my father had assumed a more active caregiver role, well beyond merely covering for my mother's early-stage dementia. He would sit on a stool in the humid bathroom when my mother showered, watchful that she didn't fall, ready with her towel. He did the cooking, the grocery shopping, the pharmacy runs. In charge. Dependable. My brother Dick, my sister Diane, and I had gathered with our parents that January in Dallas to discuss their situation. Do they stay in their house with help from caregivers? Do they move to a senior residence in Dallas? Do they move to a senior residence on the East Coast, where all 3 of their children and 6 grandchildren live? There had been another reason for such questions, however, beyond our mother's frailty. At the time, we also had a family session with our father's psychiatrist. Upon our urging, my father had recently started seeing him again. For the last several weeks, my father's small tent calendar no longer showed a busy schedule, but blank days, one after the other. His affect had become dull and quiet. His mood seemed one of resignation. He had lost weight. 12 years earlier, this psychiatrist had helped him get through a deep depression with therapy and medicine after triple bypass surgery, a period that lasted months but then seemed to dissipate. So we encouraged my father to try him again during this stressful period. In the course of that family session, I said that I was afraid of Dad doing something stupid, an indirect allusion to suicide. The psychiatrist had turned to my dad and said, "You hear her, Rudy?" My dad nodded sheepishly. "Rudy," the psychiatrist said, "that's not the legacy I think you want to leave your kids, right?" Again, my father nodded. Soon after that, my parents came to New York to sign a lease at a senior independent living residence in Manhattan. But my father was passive and withdrawn, and the day after he and my mother signed the lease, they broke it and returned to Dallas. Now, a few weeks later, my husband was handing me the phone and telling me that my father was in an intensive care unit. My father was in a coma. I was standing in our bedroom. Time stopped. I shook uncontrollably. Don Cole's deep voice with its strong Southern accent was usually so calming. He was telling me that my mother, Hannah, had found my father on the floor of the garage. As he told the story, she had thought it strange and said to herself, "He doesn't know a thing about fixing cars. What's he doing?" Still shaking, I held on to Don's every word. It seemed that my father had turned on the car, shut the garage, and lain down by the exhaust pipe. Gas? He tried to gas himself? He tried to create his own gas chamber? And now he could die. The doctors weren't sure. Don explained that his wife, Judy, had brought my mother to their house, and that, although my mother seemed to be okay, he wasn't sure how much she understood. She might be in shock. There was more. My father had apparently taken a number of sleeping pills, too. My mother had found them in the bathroom all over the counter. "Oh, my God," I said. We told our sons, Matthew and Adam, 12 and 9 years old at the time, that Grandpa was very sick. We called my brother and sister and their spouses and told them the full story. My brother and I booked a morning flight to Dallas. I began to pack. I took my black suit off its hanger, the one I would wear to a funeral. I carefully folded it and laid it in my suitcase. But my father lived. He was moved from the ICU to the inpatient psychiatric ward. When we brought his personal effects and clothing there, we were told of the many stipulations: no shoes with shoelaces, no regular razors, only electric, no scissors. As my brother, sister, and I searched for a suicide note, we stumbled upon a gray metal box containing his will, along with an envelope with the words, "Letter to my children, to be opened upon my death." But that was an envelope we had seen a glimpse of in years past, and not what we were looking for now. Our search continued. My father indeed had left a suicide note. It was scrawled in shaky print across several pages in the middle of a small pad, behind and between pages of other random notes, and next to the small tent calendar. "Look for my body in the garage. Sorry, but I could not go on. My health is gone. My mind is gone. Hearing, eyesight, constipation, incontinence, weakness. Sorry. I could not go on. I've lost my health. I've lost my mind. A tortured soul has come to rest. May God forgive me." As though he momentarily engaged with life again, one of the pages with random notes had 4 lines of instructional information. "Be sure and take the money out of a closed bank account. We never went back to the attorney to sign the new papers. My ethical will is in the gray box. And you all have access to the safe and bank account." My father spent several weeks in the psychiatric ward. He initially seemed drained of vitality, flat. He underwent 7 sessions of electroshock treatment, his hair cut short on the left side of his head for the electrodes. He spent time in art therapy with drug addicts in their 20s. Over the course of those weeks, I went to Dallas frequently and always stayed with my mother. One morning, the phone rang at 7 a.m. I jumped out of bed and ran from my childhood bedroom to answer it. "Karen?" It was my father. His voice was trembling. "Come and get me out of here," he said. "This place is a prison." I raced to the hospital, my mother in tow, though she agreed to stay in the waiting room. I found my way to my father's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed waiting, with his pale frame and sullen face. His eyes expressed helplessness. We walked in silence to the end of the hallway and sat on a wide windowsill with a view of Dallas skyscrapers in the early morning light. My father again demanded that I get him out. I didn't know what I could say to convince him, but I knew he had to remain there. I found myself trying to be compassionate, agreeing that it must be difficult. Then I heard myself saying words that came from a place unknown to me in connection to my father. A deep anger. In some ways, Dad, you committed a crime, I said. You attempted suicide. I bluntly reminded him of the history of suicide in our family and then continued, if you don't want this to happen with any of your children or grandchildren, you have to get better. You have to stay here for a little while longer and get better. Silence for a few moments. The slow blinking of his eyes, as though my words were sinking in. And then he just repeated how much he disliked the place, shaking his head from side to side, his lips tightly pressed together. I again pleaded with him to consider staying, and to do it for his children and grandchildren. After 45 minutes or so, he finally calmed down. But in the weeks and months and years that followed, I was left to consider my words. You committed a crime. If you don't want this to happen with any of your children or grandchildren, you have to get better. I was left to consider my anger at my father and maybe a fear of suicide in future generations of our family. And perhaps more than that, I was left to ponder the roots of his despair. I did not want to feel this anger toward my father, not now, not ever, and yet I did, deeply. My father was, at 86, a tortured soul whom I needed to forgive for wanting to abandon us all, for wanting to abandon me. But to forgive him, I would need to understand him. And to understand him, I would have to learn his story, and how he came to be the man who, after so many years with so many people who loved and needed him, no longer wished to live. It would take me back through the years, to Germany before and during the Second World War, to his own parents and what happened to them, to what he was able and unable to do for them, to things he never articulated, maybe not even to himself. 2. Frankfurt, before 1933. My story begins on April 11th, 1915. I was born during World War I as the younger of two children of a middle-class German-Jewish family. I began life in a fourth-floor walk-up apartment located on the fringes of the West End, the home of the reformed, well-to-do Jewish population. Rudy Baum, a son of a respectable family. My grandparents on my father Rudy's side, Norbert and Julie, née Geiger Baum, lived in Frankfurt, sometimes referred to as Frankfurt am Main or Frankfurt on the River Main. My grandmother's Frankfurt roots date back to 1632 from a long line of well-educated professionals, including lawyers, physicians, linguists, philosophers, authors, and rabbis. Her great-uncle was the renowned scholar and theologian Rabbi Abraham Geiger, a founder of Reform Judaism, born in 1810 in Frankfurt. His legacy was his challenge to and reform of traditional Jewish thinking, rituals, and customs such that an entirely new branch of Judaism emerged and thrived. Julie was born only 2 generations after Rabbi Abraham Geiger in 1883 into a middle-class family. She had 3 siblings, Helene, Willi, and Jakob. Julie had chestnut brown hair, somewhat frizzy and often pulled back in a loose bun. Her piercing, chocolate-brown eyes were set beneath thick brown eyebrows. She wore glasses for reading, little or no makeup, and simple, moderately valuable jewelry, a diamond brooch, a diamond pendant and earrings, a gold bracelet studded with tiny pearls and diamond chips. Her smile lines were the Geiger family type, running from each side of her nose to the corners of her mouth, distinctively separating her cheeks from her upper lip. Those smile lines were passed down to my father and his sister. Julie dressed elegantly, wearing custom-made suits and jackets. In 1912, at the age of 28, she married my grandfather, who was 40, 12 years her senior. He was from a family of butchers in the nearby village of Hasselbach. His given name was Norbert Nathan Baum, and he went by Norbert. My father knew little else about his parents' lives before.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?